Genesis 4:16 we're told, "And Cain went out from the presence of the Lord, and dwelt in the land of Nod on the east of Eden. And Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. And he built a city, and called the name of the city after the name of his son Enoch. And unto Enoch was born Irad, and Irad begot Mehujael, and Mehujael begot Methusael, and Methusael begot Lamech." So immediately in these verses we are given the descendants of Cain. And in chapter 5 of Genesis, we are given the descendants of Seth, who was the replacement for Abel, whom Cain slew. And the Bible is giving us two completely separate and distinct genealogies, one from Seth and one from Cain. And we're going to demonstrate to you that the genealogy descending from Cain will result in the people known today as the Jewish people. As far as the descendants of Seth are concerned, all you have to do is look at Luke chapter 3 and Matthew chapter 1, and you will be given the entire genealogy from Adam all the way down to Jesus Christ. Now the Jewish people have a completely different genealogy, which is utterly unrelated to the genealogy of the Sethites. And in Genesis 15, verses 18 through 21, we are told that of these nations that were cast out from the Garden of Eden and related to Cain, and it tells us in that same day, this is Genesis 15, verses 18 through 21, "In that same day Yahweh made a covenant with Abraham, saying, Unto thy seed," the seed of Abraham being a direct descendant of Seth, "Unto thy seed have I given this land, from the river of Egypt until the great river, the river Euphrates, the Kenites, the Kenizzites, the Cadmonites, the Hittites, and the Perizzites, and the Rephaims being the descendants of the fallen angels of chapter 6, and the Amorites, and the Canaanites, and the Girgashites, and the Jebusites." So Yahweh is telling Abraham that these are the nations that he wants the descendants of Abraham to overthrow, because they're living in the land of Canaan now, which Yahweh wants his people, the Israelites, to possess. Of course, the Israelites would first be taken into captivity in Egypt, and only after the exodus from Egypt would they take possession of this land. Now I want you to understand very clearly that this land was possessed by these people, which I just named from Genesis chapter 15, verses 18 through 21. Now, the first named people in this list are the Kenites. Who are the Kenites? The Kenites are the descendants of Cain. That's clearly what the Bible tells us. If you look up Strong's Concordance, look up the term Kenite, and you will find it is defined as descendant of Cain. Now, people have been taught that there weren't any survivors of Noah's flood. It's very common to be taught that the flood was global. However, that is an incorrect teaching. The Bible teaches no such thing. It does not teach that the waters of the flood reached the top of Mount Everest. In fact, it only tells us that we're talking about the local area, because the face of the earth described in this chapter 6, is the same expression used of Cain when he was driven off the face of the earth from the garden. So it's not talking about the planet, it's simply talking about the region. And even in Genesis chapter 6, it tells us very clearly that there were giants in those days before the flood and after the flood. Let me see if I can find the exact verse here. It's better to quote it. Yes. And so let me quote here. I'm going to quote Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. "And it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth," which is not talking about the entire planet, it's only talking about that area where they were, "and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God," which is translated from Ben Elohim, meaning the fallen angels, "saw that the daughters of Adam," we're talking about the Sethites here, "that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. And Yahweh said, My spirit shall not always strive with Adam, the descendants of Adam, for that he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. We know that the lifespans of the ancient patriarchs were much longer before the flood than afterwards. And then it says in verse 4, there were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that is after the flood as well. And we know that Goliath, being a descendant of the tribe of Gath, and we're also, I just quoted in Genesis chapter 15, that the Rephaim were on the face of the earth, and they're living in the land of Palestine, or Canaan land at that time. So they were alive after the flood. So either if the flood theory, global flood theory is correct, then all of these people miraculously reappeared, or they survived, in which clearly it is the case that they survived, as Genesis 6:4 tells us. Also the book of Jasher tells us that the many survived the flood and fled and escaped to another land. And therefore we find in Genesis chapter 15 that these Kenites, who are the descendants of Cain, are indeed alive and well in the land of Canaan. So now of these tribes, only 7 survived, and we're going now to turn to Deuteronomy chapter 7. Because Deuteronomy chapter 7 gives us a number of details of these Kenite tribes and what happened to them, and how the Israelites are supposed to relate to them. Deuteronomy 7, verse 1. When Yahweh thy Elohim shall bring thee into the land whither thou goest to possess it, and hath cast out many nations before thee, I've already given the names, but here it repeats some of them, the Hittites, and the Girgashites, and the Amorites, and the Canaanites, and the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites, 7 nations greater than and mightier than thou. And when the Lord thy God shall deliver them before thee, shalt thou smite them, nor show mercy unto them. So, in other words, since these tribes are literal descendants of the fallen angels, and had intermarried with the peoples of the territory, that these forbidden creatures were not part of Yahweh's plan for this earth. These, in fact, were a hybrid nation created by the fallen angels. And this is how we are to understand these verses. And later on, in verse 7, the Lord did not set his love upon you, nor choose you because you were more in number than any other people, for you were the fewest of all people. Talking about Noah's flood, there were only 8 of our ancestors left at that point. But because the Lord loved you, and because he would keep the oath which he had sworn unto your fathers, hath the Lord brought you out with a mighty hand, and redeemed you out of the house of the bondmen, for the hand of Pharaoh king of Egypt. Know therefore that Yahweh thy Elohim, he is God, the faithful God, which keepeth covenant and mercy with them that love him, and keep his commandments to 1,000 generations. So folks, we have to keep his commandments, and we are told numerous times in the Bible, Old and New Testament, that we must keep his commandments. The law has not been done away with. That's another false teaching of the modern churches. And he repayeth them that hate him to their face. Okay, so if you hate your God, he will repay you accordingly. To destroy them, we are told. He will not be slack to him that hateth him. He will repay him to his face. Thou shalt therefore keep the commandments and the statutes and the judgments which I command me to this day. Okay, and hold on, I have to find out the verse where he says, thou shalt not make marriages. Okay, yes, here we go. Now, in verse 3 of Deuteronomy chapter 7, it tells us, we Israelites, neither shalt thou make marriages with them, that is, these Kenite people. Thy daughter thou shalt not give to his son, nor his daughter shalt thou take unto thy son. For they will turn away thy son from following me, that they may serve other gods. So will the anger of Yahweh be kindled against you, and destroy thee suddenly. Now this is exactly what happened to the northern 10 tribes of Israel. They started to make marriages with these Canaanites, And because of this, Yahweh drove them from the face of Palestine, the northern 10 tribes area that they inhabited, and they cast them out into the wilderness of Europe. So here, the sin that they committed is the sin of race mixing with non-Israelites. And if we read the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, we find out very clearly that Ezra and Nehemiah cleaned the house of all the race-mixed people and would accept only as citizens of Judah those people who did not have mixed-race children. Deuteronomy chapter 23 clearly tells us that we shall not have mixed-race offspring come into our congregation. It clearly tells us this. I know those pastors will tell you that the word there is bastard. A bastard shall not enter the congregation of God. But if you look that word up, bastard, it's the Hebrew mamzer. It has only one meaning. It means mongrel. No mongrel shall enter the congregation of Yahweh. All the churches that are teaching you that race mixing and mongrelization is acceptable to God are lying to you, folks. The Bible does not teach any such thing. And they are using these lies to oppress you, the true Adamites and Israelites of the Bible. Until you understand this truth, that these churches have become actually your enemies, you will not understand what's going on in the world today. Because what we see is the world empire of merchants, Mystery Babylon, as ruled by the Jewish bankers, the bankers of the house of Rothschild. These are the ones promoting all these lies. These are the ones promoting this mythology that they are God's chosen people, even though they violate every law of the Old Testament, every single law of the Old Testament. Their holy book is the Talmud, not the Old Testament. And the Talmud is virtually step by step the entire denial of the law of Moses. Deuteronomy 4:2 clearly tells every priest, you shall not change the Lord's laws. You shall not change one word that I have given you. You shall not add, you shall not subtract from the written word that I have given you. These are the words of Moses, folks. So if a rabbi comes along and tells you, well, I can change the law because I'm a rabbi, he is a liar. He is a deceiver. He is leading you down the path to destruction and encouraging you to follow him. Now, I want to show that the New Testament completely verifies the teachings of the Old Testament. In fact, we have this strain of Christianity which claims that the Old Testament is obsolete, and if we don't really need the Old Testament, and it's just for our instruction. And even those people who claim that it's for the instruction, they have thrown it away and refuse to be instructed by it. So I want to show that these Christians are absolutely wrong, because the New Testament cannot be understood without an understanding of the Old Testament. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. I'm going to quote the entire chapter because this is probably the most important prophecy in the New Testament concerning the second coming. Now we beseech you, brethren, by the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and by our gathering together unto him, remember this is after the crucifixion, that ye be not soon shaken in mind, or be troubled, neither by spirit, nor by word, nor by letter, as from us, as that day of Christ is at hand. We're talking about the second coming. Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first. What does this mean? It means that there will be a time when Christians will actually begin rejecting the gospel. Christians will be adopting new doctrines that are not contained in the Scriptures, and they will actually deny the Messiah. For example, John Hagee has said that Jesus never claimed to be the Messiah. That's a blatant lie. And of course we know that his Jewish advisors are paying him to say that, because he is one of those people we call a Judeo-Christian, a Christian who has been influenced by Jewish doctrine. And since the Jews do not accept Jesus Christ as the Messiah, and he is one of their spokesmen, we expect him to say such things. Of course, that is a blatant lie, and I'm going to prove it to you. And again, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first. And Pastor Hagee is one of those who have fallen away. In fact, the entire cast of televangelists that you see regularly performing on your television screens are being advised and paid, and their whole entire network is being provided to them by the international Jew, so they can keep on deceiving you on this matter. And it says, there shall come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed. That man of sin will be revealed. Who is this man of sin? Well, let's take a look at 1 John chapter 2, verse 22. Who is a liar, but he that denieth that Jesus is the Christ? He is Antichrist, that denieth the Father and the Son. Whosoever denieth the Son, the same hath not the Father, but he that acknowledgeth the Son hath the Father also. Let that therefore abide in you which ye have heard from the beginning. If that which ye have heard from the beginning shall remain in you, ye also shall continue in the Son and in the Father. And this is the promise that he hath promised us, even eternal life. So, if you deny the Son, you deny the Father also. And the Jewish people have never accepted Jesus Christ as being the Son of God. So, whom are you going to believe? Are you going to believe the Jews and their hirelings? Or are you going to be rooted in Scripture? The Scripture clearly tells us that you must believe that Jesus is the Son of God and the Messiah. Otherwise, you are no longer a Christian, and you cannot be saved in any way, shape, or form. In fact, Jesus Christ clearly tells us that in the parable of the wheat and the tares, that those tares will rise in the latter days and pretend to be the chosen people, but they will be gathered and burnt in the fire, and only his remnant, the true believers, will be saved. Those are the wheat, and the tares but shall be gathered first and burned. They will not be saved. Anybody who tells you that the Jewish people will en masse convert to Christianity just before the judgment day is a liar. He's contradicting the words of Jesus Christ. Just read Matthew chapter 13 to prove it to yourself. Continuing now with Paul. That man of sin will be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. We know from the teachings of the Talmud that the Jewish rabbis claim that God first consults a rabbi before he makes any decision. They say that God looks over the shoulder of a rabbi when he is reading the Talmud because he is in such awe of this doctrine. Remember, the Talmud is not the Bible. And the Talmud, by and large, in main portion, denies the teachings of Moses, so it cannot be considered to be the Old Testament. And we will cite references from Jewish authors themselves, admitting this as a fact. Remember ye not that when I was yet with you, I told you these things. And now ye know that withholdeth that he might be revealed in his time. So for a period of time, the truth has been withheld from us, that we should not know who the Antichrist is, but in the latter days it will be revealed. Verse 7, for the mystery of iniquity doth already work. The Antichrist is already here, and in 1 John as well, we're told there are many Antichrists. There's not just one Antichrist. The mystery of iniquity doth already work. It's already here. Only he who now letteth will let until he be taken out of the way. And then shall that wicked be revealed, whom the Lord shall consume with the spirit of his mouth, and shall destroy with the brightness of his coming. Those liars and deceivers in these end times who are leading you down the wrong path, pretending to be God's chosen people, and are not, but do lie. Revelation 2:9 and 3:9. That's what those verses are telling you, folks. Even him whose coming is after the working of Satan, with all power and signs and lying wonders, and with all deceivableness and unrighteousness in them that perish. Now I would have to punctuate this verse by saying that ever since we American Christians have been supporting the Israeli state since 1948, we can see that our country has gone down the slippery slope of moral degeneracy, war after war after war, economic chaos, and pornography, racketeering, abortion. All of these things began when we, Christians, began supporting the Antichrist Jews in the state of Israel. Because, folks, these people are not the Israelites of the Bible. And I'm now going to quote various authors who admit that the Jewish people are not the Israelites of the Bible. Now, before we quote the Jewish authors admitting that the Jewish people are not descended from the Israelites of the Bible, I want to continue establishing the genealogy of the Jewish people from Cain. And we quoted the biblical passages of the fallen angel people that became known as the Kenites. How did they become known as the Canaanites? Well, that was because Canaan, who was the son of Ham, actually married into these Canaanite people, or these Kenite people. And because these Kenite people were better known to the Israelites through the name of Canaan, they dropped the name Kenite and simply called these people Canaanites because Canaan was one of their relatives. And what we have is a continuation of this Kenite genealogy in the Bible that tells us that these people were simply renamed as Canaanites. But before this episode occurred, let me quote now from Josephus. And this is Josephus in the very first chapter of his history of Judah. It's not the history of the Jews, it's a history of the Judahite people, who are the true descendants of Adam. We're not talking about Jews here, we're talking about Judahites. And with respect to the sacrifice, the offering that Abel and Cain gave to the God Yahweh, okay? Now Abel the younger was a lover of righteousness, and believing that God was present at all his actions, he excelled in virtue, and his employment was that of a shepherd. But Cain was not only very wicked in other respects, but was wholly intent upon getting. And he first contrived to plow the ground. Note this word, contrived. He slew his brother on the occasion following. They had resolved to sacrifice to God. Now Cain brought the fruits of the earth and of his husbandry, but Abel brought milk and the first fruits of his flocks. Now there's been this ongoing discussion of why did Yahweh not accept Cain's offering, but he did accept Abel's offering. And that was because Abel brought the first fruits, as is later established by the rituals of the Israelites offering the first fruits. The first fruits were to be offered to God, and then the rest of the subsequent harvest was to be used by the people. But Cain refused to give the first fruits. He gave whatever he chose, not giving credence to Yahweh in the first place. Okay, and then continuing here. But God was more delighted with the latter oblation when he was honored with what grew naturally of its own accord than he was with the invention of a covetous man and gotten by forcing the ground. This is what Josephus has to tell us about this episode. Now, what happens, what could possibly be meant by this? The invention of a covetous man and gotten by forcing the ground. Well, it's pretty obvious that Cain was a hybridizer. Yahweh forbids hybrid creations. He forbids the mixing of one seed with another. There are many passages in the Bible that tell us this. I'm going to quote now from the book of Jasher, chapter 4, verses 16 through 18. This is regarding the fall of the Adamites. It's a parallel story to that in Genesis chapter 6. And all the sons of men departed from the ways of the Lord in those days as they multiplied on the face of the earth with sons and daughters. And they taught one another their evil practices, and they continued sinning against the Lord. And every man made unto himself a god, and they robbed and plundered every man his neighbor as well as his relative, and they corrupted the earth, and the earth was filled with violence. And their judges and rulers went to the daughters of men, that is, to the daughters of the Adamite people, and took their wives by force from their husbands according to their choice. And the sons of men in those days took from the cattle of the earth, the beasts of the field, and the fowls of the air, and taught the mixture of animals of one species with the other, in order therewith to provoke the Lord. We're being told that Yahweh does not like hybrids. And of course we have discovered that these people in the land of Canaan are hybrids of fallen angels and the other human races that were existing on the face of the earth at that time. And in Jasher chapter 6, verses 24 through 25, we are given verification of the fact that this flood was not global and that many people survived. And the sons of men approached in order to break into the ark, to come on in account of the rain, for they could not bear the rain upon them. And the Lord sent all the beasts and animals that stood around the ark, and the beasts overpowered them and drove them from that place, and every man went his way, and they again scattered themselves upon the face of the earth. So we're told that they scattered themselves upon the face of the earth before the flood. Now, 2 Samuel 21, verses 15 through 22. Talking now about these Canaanites and Philistines and related people. Moreover, the Philistines had yet war again with Israel. And David went down and his servants with him and fought against the Philistines. And David waxed faint. And Ishbibbenab, which was of the sons of the giant, the weight of whose spear weighed 300 shekels of brass in weight, he being girded with a new sword, thought to have slain David. And it came to pass after this, there was again a battle between the Philistines at Gob. And then there was one called Saph, which was of the sons of the giant. And there was yet a battle in Gath, where was a man of great stature, that had on every hand 6 fingers, on every foot 6 toes, 24 in number, and he also was born to the giant. And when he defied Israel, Jonathan the son of Shimeah, the brother of David, slew him. These 4 were born to the giant in Gath, and fell by the hand of David, and by the hand of his servants. So we know that these giants were still in existence in the days of David, and of course Goliath was simply a descendant of the tribe of Gath. Now, what were these giants still doing upon the face of the earth if they did not survive the flood? The folks, they indeed did survive the flood, and the global flood theory is simply false. It's based on the false view of the Hebrew word eretz, which simply means land, earth, or territory, interpreting that word to mean planet, and it means no such thing. Certainly not in these verses. Now, understanding that these Canaanites are simply the Kenites renamed, we want to continue tracing their genealogy down into the times of our Lord Jesus Christ. I'm now going to quote Genesis 24, verses 1 through 4. And Abraham was old and well stricken in age. And Yahweh had blessed Abraham in all things. And Abraham said unto his eldest servant of his house, that ruled over all that he had, Put, I pray thee, thy hand under my thigh, and I will make thee swear by Yahweh the God of heaven, and the God of the earth, that thou shalt not take a wife unto my son of the daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I dwell, but thou shalt go unto my country and to my kindred, and take a wife unto my son Isaac. So in this verse, we are clearly told that Isaac is not to marry a Canaanite woman. That's very clear, folks. He is not to marry a Canaanite woman. Why? For the same reason that Yahweh sent the flood in the first place, to stop our people from race mixing with these fallen angels and other races that were in the territory at the time. Now we're going to continue with this theme in Genesis 25, verses 19 through 26. And these are the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham begat Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah to wife, the daughter of Bethuel, the Syrian of Padanaram, the sister to Laban the Syrian. These are the kinsfolk. of Abraham and Isaac. And Isaac entreated to Yahweh for his wife because she was barren. And Yahweh was entreated of him, and Rebekah his wife conceived. And the children struggled together within her. And she said, If it be so, why am I thus? And you have to picture the fact that within her womb, Esau and Jacob, her future twin sons, were actually fighting with each other within her womb. That's why she's asking, If it be so, why am I thus? And she went to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord said unto her, now listen very carefully to these words. 2 nations are in thy womb, and 2 manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels. And the one people shall be stronger than the other, and the elder shall serve the younger. And when her days to be delivered were fulfilled, behold, there were twins in her womb. And the first came out red, all over like a hairy garment. And they called his name Esau. And after that came out his brother, and his hand took on hold of Esau's heel, and his name was called Jacob. And Isaac was 80 years old when she bare them. Now remember, this verse is clearly telling us that 2 nations, 2 separate types of people are in thy womb, and the one shall be servant to the other. Now we know from the entire history of the Bible that Jacob, the younger, became the master or leader over Esau. Esau, in fact, sold his birthright to Jacob, as every Christian ought to know. And because he sold his birthright to Jacob, he became the servant of Jacob. So this is a clear prophecy of that eventuality. Now what happened here? Well, let's go into the where Esau sold his birthright. And the boys grew, and Esau was a cunning hunter, a man of the field, and Jacob was a plain man, dwelling in tents. And Isaac loved Esau because he did eat of his venison. So Isaac loved Esau because of the food that he brought home. But Rebekah loved Jacob, and Jacob sod pottage. And Esau came from the field, and he was faint. And Esau said to Jacob, Feed me, I pray thee, with that same red pottage, for I am faint. Therefore was his name called Edom. Now we know that Esau's name was changed to Edom. And the land of Edom was always to the south of Judah, because the people of Judah are not the same as the people of Edom, folks. This is very important for you to know. And Jacob said, Sell me this day thy birthright. And Esau said, Behold, I am at the point to die. And what profit shall this birthright do me? So this is Esau saying, well, because I'm just about to die, I might as well sell my birthright. What good is it to me? Jacob did not steal or trick Esau out of the birthright. And we're plainly told, let me continue here. And Jacob said, Swear to me this day, and he sware unto him, and he sold his birthright unto Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and pottage of lentils, and he did eat and drink, and rose up and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. We're clearly told that Esau despised his birthright. And the mere request by Jacob to sell him his birthright is not an evil thing, folks. That was not an evil deed, as many people, many pastors of Judeo-Christianity would have you believe. Okay, now in Genesis chapter 26, verse 35, again, continuing on the theme of race mixing, and the Bible teaches that race mixing is wrong. And Esau was 40 years old when he took to wife Judith, the daughter of Beeri, the Hittite, which is one of the Canaanite peoples, and Bashemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, which were a grief of mind unto Isaac and Rebekah. Now remember, Abraham went to great pains to find Rebekah, a kinswoman of Isaac, so that he should marry a kinswoman instead of a Canaanite woman. Now here Esau is violating that very oath that Abraham had vowed that shouldn't happen, okay? And so after this incident, after Esau married these 2 Hittite women, now we're told in Genesis 27:46, and Rebekah said to Isaac, I am weary of my life because of the daughters of Heth, that is, these Hittite women. If Jacob take a wife of the daughters of Heth, such as these which are the daughters of the land which Esau married, what good shall my life do me? Now in Genesis 28 verse 1 we are told this. And Isaac called Jacob and blessed him and charged him and said to him, you shall not take a wife of the daughters of Canaan. So very clearly, the genealogy of Adam down through Jesus Christ cannot be polluted with the seed of these Edomites, Hittites, Canaanites, and Kenites. This is clearly what the Bible is telling us. And of course, recalling Deuteronomy chapter 7, we are told very explicitly, the Israelites shall not make marriages with the Canaanites. Esau violated that law. He violated God's law of intermarrying with the Canaanites, and therefore he was cast out from among the presence of the Israelites from that day forward. Now, continuing with the genealogy of the Canaanites in the land of Canaan, and we know that these Canaanites eventually migrated south of Palestine because Palestine was the area that was occupied by the Israelites, and the Israelites had driven these Canaanites to the south. Now we recall that in Genesis chapters 27 and 28 we are told that Esau married into these Canaanite people. Now chapter 36 of the book of Genesis gives us the entire clan of these Edomite people. I'm just going to quote the first and last verses of Genesis 36. I encourage you to read this chapter for yourself and to familiarize yourself with these people. Verse 1, now these are the generations, that is the descendants of Esau, who is Edom. Esau took his wives of the daughters of Canaan. And this is a fairly long chapter giving the entire genealogy of the Edomite people. So folks, don't let anybody tell you that the genealogy of the Edomites is not contained in the scripture. And the last verse of this chapter says, he is Esau, the father of the Edomites. So now we have traced in the scriptures the fact that the Edomites are descended from Cain. Their genealogy is as such. From Cain we have derived the Kenites, and from Kenites we have derived the Canaanites, and from the Canaanites we have derived the Edomites. Now the rabbis of Judaism will tell you that these people no longer exist or they have been wiped off the face of the earth. This is not true because it's very clear from Scripture in the Old Testament, the Apocrypha, the New Testament, and from secular history that these Edomites continued into Christ's day, and in fact they continue in today's times as well, because we know them as the Sephardic Jews. We know them absolutely as the Sephardic Jews because these Edomites were the ones who became citizens of Judea, not members of the tribe of Judah, mind you, but citizens of Judea, when John Hyrcanus merged the two nations of Judah and Edom into one single nation, henceforth known as Judea. Okay, so Judah, the land of Judah was always known as simply Judah, and the land of Edom was known as Edom. But when those two nations were combined, and this happened in the year 125 BC under King John Hyrcanus of Judah, this is all recorded in the book of Josephus, that when these two nations were merged together, which was a violation of Deuteronomy 7, that our people should not intermarry with Canaanites, and we know that these Edomites are simply the Canaanites renamed as Edomites, that John Hyrcanus violated the law of Yahweh by intermarrying, beginning this process of intermarrying. Now this process took quite a while, and it wasn't very widespread, but it was always widespread among the leading tribes, because what you have, the leading people, because what you have even today, for example, the House of Rothschild, which is a Jewish banking house, ever since 1815, they have intermarried with British royalty. And British royalty, as we saw from part 1, are descended from the House of David. So that what the Jewish bankers are doing today is doing exactly what Esau did. He married into the line of Canaanites. The Jewish house of Rothschild is in fact the Edomite Canaanite house that we're talking about here in Scriptures, and as we know from part 1 as well, that the Adamic Israelites are the Caucasian people. So again, the genealogy of the Canaanite people: Cain, Kenites, Canaanites, Edomites, and these Edomites are the ones who under Herod took over the land of Judah by force, by assassination, by sabotage. All this history is contained in the works of Josephus very explicitly. And now I'm going to quote from the book of Tobit in the Apocrypha, because I'm going to verify for you. And this is one of the reasons why the Apocrypha have been removed from the Bible. Here is what Tobit has to tell his son, who they were Israelites, folks. "Be on guard, my son, against fornication. And above all, choose your wife from the race of your ancestors. Do not take a foreign wife." Again, repeating the command of Deuteronomy 7, repeating the commands of Ezra and Nehemiah not to take foreign wives. "Do not take a foreign wife, one not of your father's tribe, for we are descendants of the prophets. My son, remember that back to the earliest days, our ancestors, Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, all chose wives from their kindred. They were blessed in their children, and their descendants will possess the land. So you too, my son, must love your kindred. Do not be too proud to take a wife from among the women of your own nation. Such pride breeds ruin and disorder, and the waster declines into poverty. Waste is the mother of starvation." Now let me tell you something, folks. Today we have a repetition of what's happened in the days of Judah and their merging with Edom. We have race mixing going on today, and we can see all of our Western societies declining into poverty and starvation precisely because our abilities as the Anglo-Saxon Caucasian Israelite race, the builder race, the people who have constructed civilization on every part of this globe, when we pollute our seed line or dilute our seed line, that dilutes our abilities and capabilities. And we see that whenever our people have done so, as in Spain, when the Moors invaded and polluted our seed line, as is happening in Europe with the Arab invasion of Britain, we can see chaos and catastrophe coming about in those nations. In Germany, with the Turks taking over and race mixing with the Caucasian Israelites of Germany. We see it here in America with blacks and Mexicans. Now we see that our nations, our white Anglo-Saxon nations, are being destroyed because those people hate us. They do not love us. They want what we have, but they do not have the ability to maintain the civilization we have created. And whenever our people give up their dominion, as is happening, as has happened in southern Africa, where the Judeo-Christian ministry has encouraged the gospel of race mixing, we see that those South African white people are being slaughtered, hacked to pieces by the very people whom they sustained and empowered and made prosperous during the years of apartheid. During the years of apartheid, the white race made the black race prosperous. Those blacks had never achieved a level of prosperity, where they had never had single-family homes. They had never had cars. They had never had neighborhoods of their own. They had never had jobs in which they can make $1,000 a year. At the same time, the communists in Russia, in the Soviet Union, had instituted a totalitarian dictatorship in which the average white Russian couldn't even own a car unless he worked for it for 13 years. And he couldn't pray in his churches because the communists drove Christianity from the land. Look at what's happening to America today, folks. The totalitarians in our government, who are your international Jewish dictators, the House of Rothschild, Madoff, the various international bankers, the Warburgs, and other Jewish international banking families, have turned America into a slum. They are banning Christianity as we speak because these people are not Israelites. They are your enemies. They are the enemies of Christianity, as I quoted from 1 John chapter 2. They do not believe in the Son of God, therefore they have not the Father. They are liars and pretenders, and they are your enemies. I'm going to quote now from Genesis chapter 36. From Ezekiel chapter 36, verse 5, to verify what I just told you. Therefore, thus saith Yahweh Elohim, that is the Lord God in your King James Version, surely in the fire of my jealousy have I spoken against the residue of the heathen, that is the non-Israelite peoples, and against all Idumea. Idumea is simply Edom in Greek, which have appointed my land into their possession with the joy of all their heart, with despiteful minds, and cast it out for a prey. The Bible is clearly telling us here that the Edomites will take over our nation. And that's exactly what happened under Herod. Now, every single historian and Bible scholar that I have ever read will admit that Herod was an Edomite. There is no way that Herod was a Judahite. He was the adversary of Judah, and under his father Antipater, who was also an Edomite, Antipater bribed Julius Caesar with money to install Herod as governor of Galilee. After Herod was installed as governor of Galilee by bribery, that same Herod assassinated Hyrcanus II, who was the last legitimate Judahite to sit on the throne of Judah in the land of Judea. Lamentations 1:10 also tells us, the adversary has spread out his hand upon all her pleasant things, for she has seen that the heathen, that is the non-Israelites, entered into her sanctuary, whom you did command that they should not enter into the congregation. Lamentations 1:10 verifies again that we are not to mix our company and our seed with the Canaanites, but yet through bribery, sabotage, and murder, these people took over and usurped the throne of Judah. This is why Herod, the Edomite, when he heard that Jesus Christ was born, he heard rumors that the child who had come to redeem Israel was born, went and sent out soldiers to kill the baby. If Herod were an Israelite, he would have been overjoyed. But because he was an Edomite and an enemy of the people of Israel, he ordered that the child should be killed. Ladies and gentlemen, this explains why Herod was of such a mentality as to want to kill a baby. Now, continuing with the story of Herod being an Edomite and not a Judahite. Folks, this is extremely important information. You have to know why Herod wanted to kill Jesus. And that's because he was a Canaanite. He was a descendant of Cain. And I'm going to prove that to you from the book and the Gospel of John. First, I want to quote from the Nicene and post-Nicene Fathers, from Eusebius, Church History, the Life of Constantine, quoting the Epistle to Aristides by Julius Africanus. He has this to say about Herod. But as there had been kept in the archives up to that time the genealogies of the Hebrews, this is of course in the Temple of Jerusalem, as well as those who traced their lineage back to proselytes such as Achior the Ammonite and Ruth the Moabitess. And Ruth was of course an Israelite living in the territory of Moab. She was not racially a Moabitess. And to those who were mingled with the Israelites that came out of Egypt with them, Herod, now note this very carefully, Herod, inasmuch as the lineage of the Israelites contributed nothing to his advantage, and since he was goaded with the consciousness of his own ignoble extraction, since he knew he was an Edomite, not a Judahite, Herod burned all the genealogical records, thinking that he might appear to be of noble origin, if no one else were able from the public registers to trace back his lineage, to the patriarchs or proselytes and those mingled with them who were called the Gore. So those people who were mingled with the Israelites, the so-called strangers, were of the same race of the Israelites. They were not of the Canaanites, and they were not of the other races that were forbidden to intermarry with. So this is proof, ladies and gentlemen, that Herod was not a genealogical Judahite. Absolutely not. He was an Edomite. Now, in John chapter 8, verses 33 through 44, having a dispute with the Pharisees. Who are these Pharisees? If you read the New Testament, there's not one good word spoken of these Pharisees. They are evil. They are a generation of vipers, according to Jesus Christ, and they are the inventors of a new doctrine which denied Moses. Jesus said to these scribes and Pharisees, if ye had believed Moses, you would believe me, verifying that they are violators of Deuteronomy 4:2, inventing their own religion, which they call Judaism, but which is not the law of Moses, which is a law of their own invention. Saying to these Pharisees in verse 33, they answered, let me back up to verse 31. Then Jesus said to those Judeans, which is the correct translation, because there were Edomites in Judea and there were Judahites in Judea, to those Judeans which believed on him, because those Judeans who believed on him were more than likely Judahites, but not Edomites, because Edomites were not his kinsmen. Quote, if ye continue in my word, then are ye my disciples indeed. Remember, he's speaking to a mixed group here. It's a group of Judeans of mixed heritage, Edomites and Judahites. And then, this is the famous verse 32. And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. They answered him, we be Abraham's seed, and were never in bondage to any man. How sayest thou, ye shall be made free? So the average Christian reads verse 32 and says, well, the words of Jesus Christ are going to make us free. But these Pharisees weren't impressed by that statement. They said, instead, we be Abraham's seed, and were never in bondage to any man. Well, if they were in fact Israelites, because we're talking about their whole race, their whole nation, the Israelites were in bondage in Egypt, they were in bondage to the Assyrians, and of course the house of Judah was in bondage to the Babylonians. But how can these people, how can these Judeans say that they were never in bondage? Their nation was never in bondage at all. That's because they're Edomites. They're not Israelites. Jesus answered them and said, verily, verily, I say unto you, whosoever committeth sin is the servant of sin. And this is exactly the same prose with which Yahweh spoke to Cain after he failed to present the proper sacrifice. In Genesis 4:6, whosoever committeth sin is the servant of sin, and the servant abideth not in the house forever, but the Son abideth forever. So if you are a servant of sin, you will not abide forever, folks. If you think the law has been abolished, you've got another guess coming. If the Son therefore shall make you free, you shall be free indeed. I know that ye are Abraham's seed. Remember, Esau was also Abraham's grandchild. But ye seek to kill me, because my word hath no place in you. I speak that which I have seen with my Father, and you do that which ye have seen with your father. They answered him and said, Abraham is our father. Jesus said unto them, if ye were Abraham's children, ye would do the works of Abraham. But now you seek to kill me, a man that hath told you the truth, which I have heard of God. This did not Abraham. Ye do the deeds of your father. Now he's making a very stark contrast between his father, Yahweh, the God of heaven, and their father. Who is their father? Let's continue reading. Then said they to him, now this is in your King James Version, folks. When was the last time your pastor quoted these passages? They said to him, we be not born of fornication, we have one Father, even God. Jesus said unto them, If God were your Father, you would love me. For I proceeded forth and came from God. Neither came I of myself, but he sent me. Why do you not understand my speech? Even because you cannot hear my word. Ye are of your father the devil, and the lusts of your father will ye do. He was a murderer from the beginning. That's Cain, folks. And abode not in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaketh a lie, he speaketh of his own, for he is a liar and the father of it. This is the Gospel of John, folks. Why has your pastor not taught you these passages? Why is he covering for the evil seed, the Jews who deny your Lord and Savior? Now, as I promised you, ladies and gentlemen, Christian Israelites, I'm going to quote from various Jewish sources the fact that the Jewish people are not remotely related to the Israelites or Judahites of the Bible. These are their own words. First, from the Standard Jewish Encyclopedia about Herod. The Edomites were conquered by John Hyrcanus, who forcibly converted them to Judaism, and from then on they constituted a part of the Jewish people, Herod being one of their descendants. So the Jewish Encyclopedia admits that Herod was one of their descendants. However, they twist the facts. They did not become part of the Judahite people. They remained separate and distinct from the Judahite people, and as I explained to you, usurped the throne, and as usurpers began to dominate over the Judahite people, because Herod had become the dominant ruler of the time and elevated his kinsmen, the Edomites, to positions of authority, such as the Pharisaic priesthood. I'm going to now quote from an article by Rabbi Moshe ben Shaul on the seeds of Orthodox Judaism. Remember, I told you that the Talmud, which is the source of Jewish law, violates Deuteronomy 4, 1 and 2, which clearly states that no priest has any right to add to or subtract from the words of Moses. Speaking of a feud among rabbis right after the days of Christ, he says, the biggest feud was perhaps between Gamaliel II and Rabbi Akiva in the early 2nd century. Gamaliel II felt that Pharisaism needed some minor reforms, while Akiva felt it was necessary to make a system that gave all power and authority to the rabbis. I'm going to repeat that. Akiva felt it was necessary to make a system that gave all power and authority to the rabbis. Now remember what Jesus Christ told these rabbis in John chapter 8, that they were the children of the devil. Continuing, he brought in the doctrine that the oral law was given at the same time as the Torah, and that Moses, David, etc. were rabbis. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a blatant lie. Remember, he warned us not to believe Jewish fables? He won out over Gamaliel II in a battle that got pretty nasty and deceitful on both sides. With Akiva in charge, eventually they ruled that the rabbis could change the Torah if necessary, and that a majority of rabbis, all of Akiva's buddies, even could supersede the voice of God. They made a new Greek translation of the Tanakh to replace the Septuagint, which was the document that the Israelites of the land of Judah were using when Jesus, Paul, and the other apostles quoted from the Old Testament. They were quoting from the Septuagint. And a new Aramaic version, both of which fit Akiva's theology better. They couldn't change the Hebrew version, but their commentaries in the oral law on the Tanakh became the final authority. From this, we have Orthodox Judaism today. This is Rabbi Moshe ben Shaul. From the horse's mouth, folks, Judaism is a distortion, is a perversion of the doctrine of Moses. It is not a continuation of the doctrine of Moses. Don't believe that lie, folks. Didn't Paul tell you that in the latter days the Christians would be deluded by false doctrine? This is the false doctrine. Now, earlier I told you that the vast majority of the Jewish people are not even Shemites. They're not even Israelites. They're not even Judahites. They are imposters pretending to be Judah and Israel. I'm now going to quote from the pictorial history of the Jewish people. The pictorial history of the Jewish people tells us this about the Khazars. Of all the astonishing experiences of the widely dispersed Jewish people, the Jews were not dispersed until 70 AD. Now you know that the Israelites were dispersed in 745 BC. The real Israelites were dispersed a good 800 years earlier. The Jewish people, of all the astonishing experiences of the widely dispersed Jewish people, none was more extraordinary than that concerning the Khazars. Khazars. The Khazars, during the Byzantine era, were an aggregation of warlike tribes who, it is conjectured, must have sprung from Hun or Turkish stock. With dramatic suddenness, the Khazars entered the orbit of Jewish life. One of their Khagans, or kings, called Bulan, was converted to Judaism about the year 740 CE, by which they mean the Common Era, because the Jews don't like to use Anno Domini, because it's a reference to Jesus Christ. And with him went the Khazar tribes. Folks, the Jewish people, the vast majority of the Jewish people today are not related to Israel or Judah at all. They are descendants of the Khazars. Now, from an article entitled The Jews That Aren't by Leo Hyman from the San Diego Union, August 28, 1966. He has this to say: Nathan M. Pollock has a beef with the Israeli government. His elaborate plans to celebrate this September the 1000th anniversary of the Jewish-Khazar alliance were summarily rejected. Now, of course, you must understand that the Jewish world does not want the Christian world to understand that their heritage is Khazar Ashkenazi and not Israel Judah. An elderly, meek-looking man who migrated to Israel from Russia 43 years ago, and of course Russia was the nation that incorporated these Khazar people much later in history. Pollock ekes out a living as a translator of scientific texts and proofreader at a publishing firm, but his great passion, hobby, and avocation is historic research. He has devoted 40 years of his 64 years to trying to prove that 6 out of 10 Israelis and 9 out of 10 Jews in the Western Hemisphere are not real Jews. That is, they're not really Judahites at all, folks, but descendants of fierce Khazar tribes which roamed the steppes of southern Russia many centuries ago. Continuing here, as a matter of fact, our alleged descent from the Khazars is the central theme of the Arab propaganda, he states. The Arabs claim most European Jews have no right to be in Israel in the first place because they are not descended from the biblical Hebrews, but from Tartar-Mongol nomad tribes, including the Khazars, who were converted to Judaism en masse 1,000 years ago. So, folks, the Jewish people know that they're not descended from Judah and Israel. They know they're descended from the Khazar tribes, but they can't afford to allow you to know, because all of the money that the Christian Zionists send to that bandit state of Israel is used to prop up the Antichrist, and the Antichrist will never admit that he is not Judah. He will never admit that he is not Israel. I have 2 more quotations for you. 1 John chapter 2, verse 18. Little children, it is the last time, and as ye have heard that Antichrist shall come, Even now there are many antichrists. Don't believe the lie that Antichrist hasn't come yet. He is already here. They are already here. Whereby we know that it is the last time. They went out from us, but they were not of us. For if they had been of us, they would no doubt have continued with us. But they went out, that they might be made manifest that they were not all of us. Who was with the Israelites in those days that John is telling you are not of us people Israel, are not of us people the Judahites? These were the Edomites, folks, as the Bible clearly tells you if you understand it. One final quote from this booklet, The Mask of Edom, by William Norman Saxon. He summarizes the relationship between the Jews and the true Israelites, our people, Caucasian Israel. The Jews' masquerade as the Lord's chosen people is undoubtedly the greatest hoax in history. This is the basis of the anti-God conspiracy of which Asaph spoke. The plan began to evolve among the Jews in Babylon who, as the historian H.G. Wells wrote, found the idea of belonging to the chosen race to preeminence was a very attractive one. If they could foist themselves off on the world as Israel, their grandiose ambitions for world dominion would be greatly enhanced. They began to claim Abraham for their father and thrust their company upon the remnant of the true Judahites. As I explained to you, that's what happened in Judea when Herod usurped the throne of Hyrcanus II and kicked the Judahites out and replaced them all with Edomites. These Pharisees that Jesus Christ tells you are the children of the devil are Edomites, folks. They are not Judahites. So, to conclude this episode, the Jewish people, their genealogy from Cain went to the Kenites, from the Kenites to the Canaanites, from the Canaanites to the Edomites, from the Edomites to the Idumeans, who became known as the Pharisees, who are known today as today's Sephardic Jews. They are not, in any way, shape, or form, descended from true Israel, and the vast majority of the Jewish people today are not even Shemites. They are Ashkenazi Khazars by their own admission, if you read their writings instead of believing the lies they perpetuate in the mass media.